Welcome to this Overture class. I look forward to joining you in conversation soon in video conferencing. But before I do that, I want to share a few things about why this city immersion is such a vital part of your experience at BGU. This is a fast-paced whirlwind tour, but you'll have plenty of time for more conversations about the topics we've touched on here throughout the rest of the week in your city immersion. First, let me start with a brief history of Bakke Graduate University.
So the origins of BGU came from the Lausanne Committee for World Evangelization. This was an organization that was built by Billy Graham. In 1966, he assembled a meeting in Berlin that collected a lot of the people that he had met throughout the world that had not typically been on the radar of Western leaders. And they were amazed that God was doing so many amazing things in places they didn't realize. There was another big event that he put together in 1974 in Lausanne, Switzerland, and then another one in Manila in 1989, and then in 2010 in Cape Town. In that event, there was about 20 BGU faculty, students, and alumni that were part of the program team. But in between these big events, they wanted to create associate groups that would help further some of the missions and some of the statements that they had done in the big events. And so in 1982, they put together a group called the Lausanne Urban Associates, and Ray Bakke was one of the key leaders in that group. Between the early 1980s and 2000, they put together 250 city immersions in the largest cities in the world, very similar to the urban immersion that you're participating in. And the slogan for these was that it was about studying the whole gospel in the whole church and the whole city. However, by the year 2000, even after all these events, they approached a group that were the founders of this school and said, we've had all these events, and in some cities we've seen ongoing movements, but in most cities the events are exciting, but afterwards we don't see something ongoing. Could you create something that would help us to take these values to the next generation, but also focus more on organizational development? So not just event planning, but these events would actually result in something that would be an ongoing benefit to the city. So there was a survey taken of the people within Lausanne. About 70 people were interviewed, an hour or so each, and the naming consultants came back and said, we have a name suggestion for you. You should call your school Paradox University, because what we're finding is people do not want a seminary. There's already enough seminaries that have contextualized theology in various continents and various countries, and that would be very difficult for a global university to do. But what they are finding is that in their countries, there's this mass urbanization, and they are trying to understand the theology and the background and just even the skills on how to deal with the mass migration to the cities. And so they said, could you have a college of urban studies? But they're also saying that the whole world is being reshaped and remapped around economic development. And could you also have a college of business to help people understand how to engage that? But putting those together would be a college of Christian theology focused in these two areas. And could there somehow a way that you would work with all three of these groups? But yet to have a college of business and a college of theology and a college of urban studies is a paradox, because often urban ministers look at business people as slumlords and Darth Vaders. There's not a trust there. And both business people and urban ministers look at theologians as being full of jargon, talking too long, often being very windy and confusing, and not necessarily practical. And often business people looked at urban ministers as being heavenly minded but earthly naive. And so putting these groups together, which had different languages, different approach, just whole different sets of gifts and perspectives, would be a paradox and almost impossible to accomplish. However, they said, as most naming consultants would, the consultants give you the kind of the bad idea before the good idea, make their good idea look better. They said, you've engaged a family in this movement, in this formation of the school, that their name could reflect the paradox of these different sectors, yet all part of one family. And Ray Bakke is an urbanologist and could be part of guiding the Urban Studies School, well known around the world for his urban work and writings. His brother, Dennis Bakke, has started arguably the largest organization in the world that has a strong emphasis on sustainability and social good. The company was called Applied Energy Services. It was the largest independent electricity company in the world. The only other two organizations that owned more electricity in the world was the nation of Russia and the nation of France. It's located in 36 nations, had almost 40,000 employees, and had a market cap of $40 billion. And they said, this company actually articulates a lot of the values that you're trying to do in your business school. And then there was a third brother, Lowell Bakke, who was pastoring a church in Washington State, and the church was kind of unusual and innovative for its time because he talked a lot about the church gathered on Sunday and then the church scattered, breathing out into the community throughout the rest of the week, coming back in, breathing in to be the church gathered on the next Sunday. And one particular Sunday, he might commission missionaries that were serving in Guatemala. But the next Sunday, he would commission missionaries that were serving in the local school districts. Or the next Sunday, missionaries that were serving on the police force. Or the next Sunday, missionaries who were business people that were in retail positions in the community. And then finally, the fourth sibling was Marilyn Bakke Pearson. And she was a Bible teacher and a women's leader. And so this family of four reflected the paradox of business, of urban studies, theology, and an emphasis on women's leadership, yet they were all one family. And they said they recommended that this would be a name, partly because we didn't want to use a name that was overtly Christian, even though we never hide the fact we're Christian, but serving in China, in Kazakhstan, and other places, it allowed us to have entry in and to be able to accomplish this, often crossing our borders and allowing governments to be able to work with us. And so the end result was three colleges, the College of Business, College of Urban Studies, and a College of Christian Theology. And because of the Lausanne network, the school was started with students, faculty, and alumni in 50 nations. The mission statement for Bakke Graduate University is, Bakke Graduate University strengthens leaders who steward resources with and for vulnerable people and places by means of contextual, Christian-based education innovatively delivered throughout the urban world.
In this next section, I'm going to cover some brief snapshots about how BGU attempts to accomplish its mission. In some cases, I'll just state a topic that you'll study later in this immersion, or in some cases, in later courses during your degree. As a topic is listed, please make a note of those that you want to talk more about, those that you have an expertise in, and those that you have questions about.
So one of the distinctives of BGU is we attempt not just to study about the world, but actually study in the world and with the world through global relationships and global locations. There is a list of educational values that were put together actually over a decade by the network, the Lausanne network, and others that joined BGU. And you can see this in your packet, but also on our website. And I'll go through I'll show a few on the PowerPoint quickly. Something you can look at later, and certainly gives you an idea of where some of the expertise in faculty and alumni are that you could explore deeper if you desired. Also, you will see in every syllabus 8 perspectives. And what we've looked at is, what are the 8 areas of focus that we hope that every student will gain a new perspective, a new worldview, will grow in just really seeing the world and God and themselves differently. And most courses will emphasize at least 1 or 2 of these 8 perspectives. But you'll see these, and will be talked about a little bit later in the overture, as important parts of the BGU experience. Also, every course attempts to have learning outcomes in 5 areas. The first area is spiritual formation. We hope that in each course that both the faculty as well as the students will find themselves in a spiritual formation process that results in them trusting God more and receiving God's love more. And so throughout the different courses, things are designed to help us to understand how God is working. So it's not just a course to learn new knowledge, but it actually hopefully shapes all of us to be more trusting of God as a result of the course. A second area of learning outcomes is these perspectives, and we hope that every single course will help everybody involved to move to a different level in the perspectives, the 8 perspectives, and seeing God and the world in new ways, as well as themselves. A third area is knowledge. And certainly any graduate program is going to require new knowledge, but we try to aim that, not just knowledge out there for the purpose of knowing things, but toward perspective goals and certainly toward spiritual formation. A fourth area is skills. And what we hope each course will do is help people not only learn things with their head, but also accomplish things in new ways with their hands. And then the fifth area is application. We hope that at every course that a student is not just applying something in the future, but the way the assignments are put together, the way they write their journals, that the actual content of the course is being applied weekly as they go through the course. BGU is a graduate school, and so it has master's and doctorate degrees. Master's degrees are designed to give you a mastery over a focused area of study. A doctorate degree is designed to increase your expertise to even a higher level, but also to equip you to teach others. BGU has, up till now, professional doctorates, a doctorate of transformational leadership and a doctorate of ministry, versus a research doctorate, and certainly we're in the process of investigating how we might be able to do a PhD. But the difference between the two is a PhD or research doctorate is really designed for people that are heading for academia as their career. And so the joke is you study more and more about less and less until you know the most about the least of anybody in the world. And certainly this is an important degree if somebody's in academia to be able to demonstrate that in-depth research, because that's going to be a part of their job. But for most BGU students, they're advanced leaders on the front line of urban ministry, business, or theology. And so a professional doctorate is designed to help somebody reflect upon the action they've taken prior to the enrolling into the degree, learn from that, gain and be able to teach other people what they've learned, as well as take it to the next level. And so a professional doctorate, while it's called a terminal degree and qualifies somebody to teach in any other doctoral program, certainly within U.S. and United Kingdom accreditation, it really is designed in the dissertation that the dissertation itself would have a transformational impact. Because of that, BGU allows dissertations to have alternative formats. And many people have written dissertations that are actually published books. And yet, because it's a dissertation, it has to have a little bit of a format so that the first matter, the first 3 or 4 chapters, is in APA format. And then there's sometimes the galley proofs of the book that they've published in the middle, and then the end of the bookend is actually, again, an APA format that's a research appendix. And so what somebody might buy on Amazon as the first chapter is actually the 4th chapter in their dissertation. But it allows the book that they've written to have wide distribution, but it also makes sure that that front chapters, often a statement of the hypothesis or problem, a survey of the literature that they conducted in order to prepare for writing the book, a theological framework in another chapter, so that even though these are things that somebody might not want to read, it is behind the book and gives it so much more strength. But it also means that this is a dissertation that's not just going to sit on a shelf someplace, but actually the result of the project, result of the writing, will have transformational impact. And because a professional doctorate is allowed alternative formats, you could also do a documentary, and so that the bookend would be surrounding a DVD that has a documentary. It could be a business plan for a new organization that you're starting, a product plan for something that you're taking to the next level in your business or your nonprofit. It could also be a very large grant request. All of these are viable projects in a professional doctorate for a dissertation. The value proposition that BGU tries to give to students is not what other schools might do, and it's necessary, is to say, we will give you access to famous faculty who've written books, although we have published a lot of books in faculty and alumni as well as students, or that we have a great campus, because we don't, or that we have great sports teams. We thought about starting a Baki hockey team, but decided against that. However, here's the things that we hope that the value that you will get, and as you graduate, you'll give to others as part of the BGU family, is first of all, we hope that BGU will help every student to get a bigger view of God and a bigger view of the world. Secondly, we hope that BGU will help every student to understand their calling and their purpose with greater clarity. And then third, we hope that BGU will give every student practical skills and an ongoing lifetime learning network to help that person accomplish their calling in new ways. BGU has adopted the Lausanne vision of whole gospel, whole church, and whole city, but has also added the whole person to that as well. So when we talk about the whole gospel, sometimes it's hard to understand good news until you understand the bad news. And the bad news of Genesis 3 is that when Adam and Eve rebelled and ate the fruit, there was 4 breaks. There was a break between us and God. There was a break between us and ourselves. All of a sudden we had shame. We didn't understand who we are. We didn't have an identity that we had prior to that. There was a break between us and each other. All of a sudden Adam and Eve were blaming each other. And there was a break between us and our world. Weeds grew up where there were not before. Animals were suddenly afraid of us. And so when we talk about the good news of the gospel, the whole gospel, there's a reconciliation in all 4 areas. Now, the only way that reconciliation happens is because there is a reconnection between us and God. But the fullness of the gospel says as we accept Jesus Christ as our Savior and are reunited with God for eternity, there is other good news that's a part of that. There's a reconciliation between us and ourselves. For the first time, we're able to re-understand what our true identity is, and that is creatures created by God. And we begin to have that ability to have a comfort in our own skin that we did not have before salvation. But there's also a reconciliation between us and each other. By our love for each other, the world will know that we're disciples. And there's also a reconciliation between us and our world. For the first time, we're able to understand what true sustainability is. We understand how we utilize the environment to accomplish God's purposes, but not to destroy it. We begin to understand economics. We understand ecology. We understand all kinds of things about our world that we didn't understand before we were reconciled with God. And so the whole gospel is a reconciliation between us and God, us and ourselves, us and each other, and us and the world. And in light of that, you also hear another conversation about how we look at the Great Commission. Many times we say the Great Commission and we don't realize that it's actually connected to a previous commission. Do we say that's like the okay commission or the good commission? But there is a commission in Genesis 1 that says that God created Adam and Eve and said, have dominion over the earth, steward the earth, take the earth and use it for God's purposes as you are a steward or a vice regent of the earth. And so when we get to Matthew 28, which is often called the Great Commission, and Jesus says, go therefore and teach all that I've commanded you, he has talked an awful lot about the kingdom in his teaching. And we recognize that in many ways the kingdom, the garden, and the New Jerusalem are actually a state in which we are following God's purposes. Perhaps it's more accurate to call the Matthew 28 commission as the second commission that restates the purpose of the first commission, but to a fallen world. And so without understanding the first commission, it's often difficult to understand the second commission. And that commission really talks about a reconciliation in all 4 areas. It's actually a return to our purpose, in part now to be fully realized in the New Jerusalem.
Next, we'll talk about the whole city. Initially, this talked about covering both the rich and the poor, those that are powerful and those that are underserved. It also means talking about all the sectors that impact and make up a city: the church, nonprofit organizations, business, government, education, and local communities.
Throughout your time at BGU, there will be a number of ways that the city is looked at. We'll discover the importance of urban and global themes in the Bible. We learned that the Bible starts in a garden and ends in a city. We'll be urbanites for eternity. The city is a place of blessing, not a place of curse. And while urban is an area of density in which a certain number of people live in a square mile or square kilometer, urbanization is not only the spread of that, but also the mindset. Even though people may not live in an urban density because of media, because of pop culture, often they are urbanized because of the influence of culture. We'll learn about relief, development, and advocacy. And one way to just describe that It used to be said that if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day, but if you teach him to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. But the question comes up, what if the pond is polluted and there's no fish there? What if there is a war going on and you could fish there, but you'd be caught in the crossfire? What if there's a fence around it and only people of a certain race or skin color can fish there? And so there's a need not just for relief, giving a person a fish, and education, teaching them to fish, but there's also a need for all kinds of development, changing the environment, making it a healthy place, as well as advocacy, changing the systems of evil that are keeping people in poverty and keeping people in injustice. And so part of the design is not just to teach somebody to fish, but train them and give them the resources and empower them to own the pond. And so what we're talking about is inside the urban world, you'll be studying relief, which is often after disasters or just when the economy is so bad, people just need relief. Development, which is not just educational development, but social, spiritual, economic, all types of development. And then advocacy, changing the systems of evil that are causing the problems that even often relief and development cannot cure. We learn that the world has moved to the city. There's cross-cultural missions in your own city, as so many people from other places have moved there recently as refugees or just major migration streams. Talk a lot about racial reconciliation, racial and economic injustice, white privilege. We'll learn about the greatest migration of people groups in the history of the world is occurring right now, what that means and where those are happening. Talk about regentrification. What are the opportunities of that, but also the challenges, as poverty, which in U.S. cities used to be located in the inner city, while international cities, it's always been located in the suburbs, typically. Now we're finding that through regentrification, often people are being dislocated and not really having a place to live. And poverty now is being spread to different locations in the city, which opens up new challenges. You'll learn about asset-based community development, ABCD, and appreciative inquiry. You'll learn about exegeting the city. What does it mean to come in and just look around the city and begin to see what is God doing in its past and its present? How do we just observe that and begin to interpret it and translate it and just listen well? We'll learn about the difference between the city as a battleground versus city as God and man's playground. We'll also learn how different movements approach changing the city, not just in part, but in whole.
So as part of the whole church, the whole world, and the whole city, what are the implications for business?
Business is a significant solution to poverty and overdependence on donors who exert outside control and create toxic charity. A lot of conversation about a theology of work, that business as a call is just as valuable to God's kingdom as the call to be a missionary or a pastor. And there's a big difference between business as missionary, which is missionaries trying to act like business people and perhaps doing both poorly, versus business as a mission and calling, given to somebody through their gifts and calling, and seeing that as a valuable calling in and of itself. There'll be discussions about human dignity economics. What does it mean to explore economic theories based upon how humans are created in God's image, to steward creation and make decisions on behalf of God, with responsibility and accountability to God? How do we adjust that economic theory to account for a fallen world where every man is pursuing his own way? If Martin Kaler's quote is right, mission is the mother of theology, and we are discovering that global business is opening up some of the most significant doors for mission in our lifetime, then does that place business people in the best position to be the frontline theologians of the present and the future?
What are some of the global themes that you'll experience and study while you're at BGU?
We certainly see in the Old Testament that Israelites were called to be a witness to the nations, not just to hold Yahweh as their own personal God. Ribaki is famous for quoting that Jesus was part of the diaspora. He was an African refugee. He points to the genealogy of Matthew 1 and shows that Jesus' ancestors included Rahab, a Canaanite, and Ruth, who is a Moabite. He then said that Jesus was born with the blood of the nations, which he shed for the nations. And so how do we try to listen well to people from cultures that confuse us? How do we know the difference between cultures that are individualistic, innocent guilt cultures versus community, honor, shame cultures versus tribal, power, fear cultures.
BGU has a Christian theology school. We need to probably understand what the definition of theology is. Theology is the science of studying God. It came about the same time that other sciences developed, such as geology. And in the case of geology, you look at rocks in a detached, subjective way. And your goal in geology is to try to understand something through scientific experiments, hypothesis, and testing your hypothesis that you didn't understand before. The point of science and science study is to reduce confusion and to gain knowledge. But is that how we do theology? Is it something that we can detach from in an objective way? Or instead, is theology really about a way to experience God more and have God impact us more deeply? Best Christian theologians actually are able to say, I don't understand, with a sense of rest, because maybe they've learned that they understand less and less about God the more they study Him, but they do know that He's good, and they do know that He has chosen to reveal Himself in very specific ways. And so the science of theology is a very different type of science than the other sciences, such as geology. The aim is more about trusting His goodness and His power than it is about trying to control our understanding of who God is.
Or as William Perkins quoted, theology is a science of living well and blessedly forever. Many different kinds of theologies. A systematic theology breaks down the study of God into the classical focus areas, things like Christology, angelology, and eschatology. Topical theology, rather than starting with the classic systematic categories, it starts with the questions and problems of our life. What does the Bible say about poverty, about economics, about government? Then there's grassroots theology. If the Holy Spirit illuminates our understanding of God, how do we not only preach to those who are not as educated as we are, but also listen to their response, not to see if it conforms to our way of thinking, perhaps teaches us whole new insights. Then there's biblical theology, which studies various natural sections of the Bible, the Gospels, the epistles, and see what does it say there? What is the story of Scripture in those sections? What is the exegetical meaning? What did this passage mean to the original audience, discovered as much as possible by historical, grammatical, and linguistic scholarship? What is the expositional meaning? What has been the way it's been interpreted throughout history, discovered by studying the creeds in church history? And then what's the hermeneutical meaning? How do we teach the Bible so that it is understood today without violating its exegetical and expositional meaning? Then there's narrative theology. The Bible is a story. Just because it is a story doesn't mean that it's not true. How do we let the whole story of the Bible and the many stories in the Bible impact our mind, emotions, and will and actions in the way that only stories have the power to do? What personal narratives do we have, often hidden from us, that cause us to hear and believe the truth of Scripture in our mind, but still hold narratives of shame, fear, guilt, anger, pain, and loneliness that keep our whole person from believing the truth? How does spiritual formation not just give us right knowledge, but provides habits and experiences to help us overcome the skepticism that we're born with as fallen creatures about the goodness of God? How do we still believe, like Adam and Eve, that by withholding the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that God is holding out on us and doesn't have our best interest in mind? Theology is designed to address that.
There are perhaps a few things in all of this that could occupy your conversations on the long bus rides, dinners together, and just times of conversing over what you're seeing, what you're feeling, and what you're thinking. So what are some other snapshots of the learning adventure that BGU is inviting you to be a part of as a student and then as a lifelong learner as a graduate?
So BGU is a perspective school. How do you change and expand your worldview by immersions into cross-cultural experiences and relationships? It's a network school. If you'll notice, there's often a gray line between who teaches, faculty or students. Faculty are often learning more than even the students, as students come in with a more advanced knowledge in particular areas than even faculty and are called upon to teach their students. A lot of what happens in BGU is peer learning, both learning at a student level but also after graduation. BGU tries to do a highly tailored curriculum utilizing over 800 alumni as mentors and coaches, but less certain tracks to run on, which is great for people that like to carve out their own path, but sometimes scary for people who want a more defined set of rails to run on. BGU tries to operate from a joy at work decision process, something that you'll study much later in your program. So we try to avoid committees and bureaucracy and instead have decentralized authority, but with responsibility and accountability.
We hope that you own your BGU experience and see yourself as part of the BGU family. And as a family member, you have the right to critique what you're experiencing. But yet, as you critique it, you also have the responsibility to come up with the solutions and commit to be part of that solution. Sometimes we've been described as a school like Hotel California. You can graduate, but you can never leave.
During your time at BGU, we want to introduce you and get you involved in some of the Lausanne issue groups. 35 topic-specific groups that include events and meetings, networking around the world. So this is just a whirlwind checklist, some of the topics, some of the areas that you'll be exploring in much more depth later.
So let's stop. What surprised you the most in this whirlwind tour of BGU? What are you most excited about in this journey with BGU? What do you want to learn more about? In what areas do you actually have an expertise that you could teach and share with others in BGU?